Let's bring in Caitlin Huey-Burns. She's a CBSN political contributor and a national political reporter for Real Clear Politics. She joins us now on set. You just heard Caitlin, Nancy breaking it all down, saying that some of the nuts and bolts that we expect the Republicans to try and pass. Here's the question. They're going to try to do this next week without even waiting for a CBO score. Now, for our viewers to understand, the CBO is nonpartisan. It is led by a Republican. The last time the CBO scored the last attempt to repeal the Affordable Care Act, they said something like 30 million Americans would lose their coverage under this Republican plan. This time, we're not even going to know.
So we don't know how many people will lose their coverage or really how much this is going to cost.
Right. And in the build up to this, you framed it exactly right, that they have to, they're feeling compelled to get this through because they're facing a deadline here, right? This reconciliation process they've been trying to use for this expires at the end of the month. They want to use that process because it doesn't require any Democratic votes. The thing is here that you're still looking at the same key players from the last debate, the Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Susan Collins of Maine, John McCain of Arizona. A lot of these folks voted against the health care bill last time around, and because this has gone through so quickly, people haven't really been able to absorb it yet. And remember, the Senate is going on a short recess, right? They left Washington last night. They're back home in their states this week, and certainly we'll hear a lot of pushback, and Democrats are really trying to gin up their base of support. You're going to hear a lot of phone calls coming into these Senate offices, and I think that could influence the decisions. And as we were talking about before, too, governors of some of these states have come out against it, Republican governors.
Well, speaking to that, them going back home, them getting the phone calls, Jimmy Kimmel in his monologue was relentless, and he finished it up with saying, you know, call your representative and tell them how you feel. Do you think Jimmy Kimmel could have an impact? I mean, could he contribute to this bill not passing?
Well, certainly he'll have an impact with those that are already pretty much probably against an overhaul of Obamacare. So that can have an effect in terms of just making the public aware that Republicans are trying to still repeal the health care bill. You know, a lot of people thought this fight was over, right? After the last Senate bill failed, people thought that they were moving on to tax reform. And so Democrats are trying to make clear that this could pass. So we'll see.
I mean, you know, to your point, I guess a lot of people, I don't know that a lot of people put Jimmy Kimmel in the same category as they might put some left coast, west coast actors and celebrities. He seems like a sincere guy. He's got a child with a very, very terrible condition. And his point, I think, that he was making, and this is something that Senators Cassidy and Graham have not been able to answer. In the bill, they suggest that the states will be able to provide insurance for people and make it affordable. Well, affordable to you and to me and to Caitlin is different than it is to a family making, you know, $40,000 a year. And the states are going to be left up to that in conjunction with the insurance companies, and so who knows what affordable could look like.
Right, exactly, and it's not well defined in this bill, and conservatives are going to like the idea that this block grant to the states, right? Let the states decide. Well, you know, that kind of money is not necessarily going to be the same amount of federal dollars, depending on how this works out. So there's lots of uncertainty about, okay, yes, the states will get money, but what amount of money? What will this look like, and how will this move going forward? So there are lots of unanswered questions, and I think, you know, even if this passes the Senate, which is surely no bet, the House will have to pick this up. And again, conservatives will like the state-based approach, but you also have lots of more moderate Republicans in the House who are facing tough re-election fights next year, will have to explain this kind of vote back home. And remember, even though this healthcare bill passed the House, it was by a very close margin, and that took a lot of time. So this is certainly an uphill battle, but Republicans are feeling like this is their last best chance to do this. And they got a lot of heat for not fulfilling a campaign promise.
But if they're unable to do this.
One of the people that gave them heat was the president.
Right. And but I wonder if, have you been hearing from your sources that perhaps the fact that the president seemed to be willing to work with Democrats Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, that this may have lit a fire under some of the GOP. In other words, they want to prove to the president, no, look, Mr. President, you can work with us. We can get your agenda passed.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of different kinds of pressure points here, right? You have the donor base, which is, wanting to see a Republican majority accomplish some of the things that they promised. You have the activist base, you have the conservative base. Trump certainly has tried to put pressure, but we've seen that pressure hasn't really worked in terms of actually getting this legislation through. So I think, again, just facing this deadline, it's kind of a way to say now or never.
Yeah. So we got to ask you about the president's speech yesterday at the United Nations in front of the General Assembly. Depending on who you talk to, he used some undiplomatic language, you might say, or direct language, speaking to Kim Jong-un. Maybe this is the way you have to talk to this guy, right? What sort of reaction are you hearing from Congress?
Certainly some mixed reactions. So you have supporters of the president and some conservatives really liking this kind of tough talk. Yes, it was certainly unprecedented to use the term rocket man in front of the UN General Assembly. I think that raised a lot of eyebrows, and a lot of eyebrows raised in the foreign policy community who's not used to this language. The president has been making the argument that everything past presidents have done hasn't necessarily worked because we're still in this situation. So supporters of his kind of like this tough talk. There are questions, though, about what are these next steps exactly. So I think there's a lot of questions remaining after this speech, but certainly I think his base of support will be happy with this because they were kind of concerned about the number of close allies of the president, people there with him since the beginning, have since left the administration, are kind of working on the outside, Steve Bannon among them, who liked this more nationalist approach. I think they would have seen many things to like in this, but there has also been criticism that it was a little disjointed. Calling for every nation to empower themselves and think about themselves first, America first, while at the same time calling for intervention in a lot of areas.
Right. That's something that we pointed out
yesterday. Mixed criticism.
And to be fair to the president, the focus has been on his statement that the United States would be forced to totally destroy North Korea. But if you listen further on, he says he hopes that it doesn't come to that, and that is what the United Nations is for. That's what he says in the speech. The UN is a body that was enshrined to deliver peace to nations around the world. So the president's saying, look, we don't want to do this, but if we have to, if they threaten our allies, we are prepared to do it. But the UN exists as a body to prevent war.
Right, and Nikki Haley has been kind of touting that line as well. She's kind of increased her rhetoric a little bit, but also saying that nobody wants this kind of escalation. And so what's interesting too is, as we know, we covered the campaign, the president was very critical of institutions like the UN, and he kept up that criticism a little bit in this speech, saying that we want to make sure we get a fair deal out of this. And so I think that's something that's appealing to people, but I think he's also appealing to supporters, but I think that also he's kind of recognizing the importance of having allies, right? And so this is kind of blending his ideas and rhetoric with kind of the reality of these alliances.
Absolutely. Caitlin Huey-Burns, always good to have you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.